didn't have a real idea what I was getting into that day. There was an armed person had entered the Department of Community Services. He'd fired a shot, said that they had explosives and had taken hostages. It was probably the most excruciating period that I've had to deal with as a negotiator. I had nothing but words to change a situation from a life and death situation to being safely resolved. One sentence can be the difference between life and death. And in this negotiation, I remember one sentence that I said that always haunts me.
Police emergency.
Hello?
Yes, mate.
My full name is Troy Charles Millgate. My wife's full name is Judith, or Judy as she's known, Glenda Millgate.
Okay.
I've got 2 other people in the room, and me and Judy have got 4 strapped to our chest. If I get shot, you'll hear 2 explosions.
Okay, Troy. Well, hopefully no one's gonna get shot, so you'll be all right, mate.
A tense standoff in Sydney's southwest. The man took hostages at a local welfare office in Liverpool.
It was a very flammable situation. I was immediately to get out there.
There were 2 hostages, 2 employees down in the reception area. We had to try and get them out. You really have a deal of stress while you're trying to assess the situation until you get an idea as to what the problem is, how serious it is, how you're going to control it.
When I arrived on the scene, there was a lot of confusion, a lot of noise. The most urgent thing when I arrived was to try and get as much intelligence about the incident and the people involved.
The man at the centre of the siege is 25-year-old invalid pensioner Troy Millgate.
I want to tell the welfare
Yeah.
and ask them, tell us why they took our baby, because they had no reason. They took our...
Calm down, mate. And I'll do what you want me to do. But you'll need to calm down.
It was learned that they had been in conflict with the Department of Community Services in Wollongong. The authorities had seized their child. He just wanted the child back. He was threatening to kill both himself and his wife, and claiming that they would not be the only ones to die. He said that he and his wife had explosives strapped to their body and that the 2 bombs had a range of ways in which they could be activated. If he was shot and his body reacted in a certain way, it would set the bomb off, or his wife was shot, it would set the bomb off.
Troy had convictions for stealing explosives and convictions for making explosives.
There were a number of people who worked in there that were allowed to leave. We gathered them and consulted with them to find out what we could about what was going on inside. And it was during that period that we learnt there were about 24 people upstairs in the Department of Community Services. It became clear the matter was a very serious situation.
They were in the office above Troy, which he was unaware of.
So we had to try and make contact with them to say, stay quiet, don't move, don't make a noise, lock yourselves in.
We had to try and get them out as fast as we possibly could. That involved the tactical team working out a plan to do exactly that. We also had to make sure that the 2 hostages with Troy were safe. So my role was to make communication with the person of interest as soon as I could. From that point, we bring the Negotiators truck in I took over the role of primary negotiator. So I hadn't been in a hostage situation before like this. You're not only nervous about the situation, but you're nervous because you know that everyone from the commissioner down is listening to you. And of course, police are very good critics, and I was well aware of that as well. I said, "My name's Steve, I'm from the police. How can I help you today?" "I don't really know what's going on. Would you just mind letting me know what's happening?"
Okay, what I would like before me and my wife die is for us to know why the welfare took our baby, for one, without any reason.
"What? No reason at all?"
No. I tried going through the right process every time, but they just weren't willing to give me answers whatsoever.
It doesn't seem very acceptable, does it? What I was trying to achieve in the first phase of conversations is building rapport. And that's really the first aim, is in any negotiation, is to build a rapport, as fast as you can, so that you get an understanding about how each other are operating and to build trust. And so the tone I took was a neutral tone. In other words, I'm curious, I want to find out what's going on, I want to find out what he wants, and I want to make sure that we de-escalate from that point.
I've tried to do everything legal.
Yep.
All the time. And all it got me was a kick in the pants. I've always had to starve, usually for food, and the pension department, they're in the process of cutting us off.
So you were depressed in relation to just not having enough money to live, is that right?
And no shelter.
So when a situation like this has evolved to the point where there is a siege, you're almost invariably dealing with really quite significantly abnormal human behaviour. My role was that of a consultant psychiatrist to make an analysis of the intelligence information to gain an understanding of what exactly it was that was being played out. It's important to appreciate the dangerousness and seriousness of the overall scenario. What you had was a man with explosives who had a firearm in an environment where he was holding hostages. So it becomes very important not to cause this man additional frustration.
Who's actually in there?
Leslie and Megida.
Leslie and Megida. Okay, they're the only two ladies.
Yeah.
In there with you.
Yeah.
While we talk, how about letting one of the girls go?
I can't.
How come?
Because I know you'll do. You'll come in. I can't do that.
Okay, Troy, I want you to understand that nobody's going to come in there, okay?
Yeah.
All right? And he was calm but determined. But he said that he was prepared to use the explosives and to use the hostages to get what he wanted. This was about a time where there was an army officer had been brought to the scene, an explosives expert. I got Troy to describe what the bomb looked like and how he actually made it. I saw that the army guy, he was nodding through the description of the bomb and indicated that not only would the building go up, but the negotiators' truck would go up as well. And we couldn't move the truck because as the police came into the scene, they parked their cars and they all went to their various areas and took all their keys with them. So we were locked in there. And that's where I thought that, well, that's a motivator for resolving this peacefully.
All cars in the vicinity of the Liverpool Department of Community Services. Armed offender in the main reception area.
We had the building surrounded so no one could get out and no one could get in. We had to set up teams who might have to attack the building if things went bad.
My role during the rescue operation is to ensure that Troy or Judy do not leave my line of sight. It's critical to watch where they go and what they do before I decide to use lethal force to end a situation. What needed to be a consideration was the fact that there was an IED involved. It's a shortened term for an improvised explosive device, where you only need a small amount to do a considerable amount of damage. Troy and Judy were visible quite regularly through the scopes. Troy was in his early 20s. He was carrying quite regularly this sawn-off .22 rifle. Judy was a little bit different to Troy. Judy's body language appeared submissive. She was showing a lot of anxiety. There was no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, I had to consider, was Judy wearing or carrying the IED as a bomb on her body?
We had their names, but we had to find out what we could about these people. We had police who were continually inquiring about the backgrounds to Troy and his wife Judy.
He had one of the hardest childhoods that I've ever read. He had an abusive father, more than likely sexually abused. Troy's son was about 3 months old, and he'd left the son in the care of his foster mother. She contacted the Department of Community Services and asked them to take charge of the son.
He'd lost children to social security services in the past, and he now had his most recent child removed. He was there to leverage his position to find out what had happened to his son and to get an explanation why his son was removed from him. But at the same time, he insisted that he was there to kill himself and his wife. And that really was not logical. If we gave him that information, he was going to kill himself. And if we didn't give him that information, he was still going to kill himself. There was absolutely no chance of resolving the problem, given the way he was behaving.
His demands were a catch-22 situation. And so my job then was to, okay, we start using time to really get to the bottom of the situation and to try and get out all the underlying factors that are involved in this situation. At the same time, there was 24 people in the office above Troy. Those people were constructive hostages as well and in danger.
Our biggest concern was the IED. It had a propensity to cause damage to untold people in that location. Troy and Judy weren't aware that they were upstairs.
But we knew that they could see out onto the street through the front windows and door. And so there was a decision made that the tactical team were going to get those people out of the office through a back lane.
We might be able to go up the stairs from the back of the building, bring them down carefully and silently.
The individuals that were trapped up there had communications with negotiators, and the planning in terms of their extraction could be explained to them by the negotiators succinctly.
While that rescue went on, to try and keep Troy's mind off listening for things that might be occurring.
I was given the instruction to keep him talking on the phone.
By maintaining calm, acknowledgement, supporting good behaviour and de-emphasising negative or dangerous behaviour. The issue that really dominated the picture was the threat of a bomb.
It was a very tense decision to make because You're only going to get one chance at these things.
Haven't heard any word back yet.
How long?
I don't know. See, I don't want to lie to you, Troy. I can only tell you what I know. Well, we didn't speak to Troy specifically about the child because it was the heart of the demand.
We were not going to name the place or the exact person who had taken possession of his child because that might put that person at risk.
And I could easily confront him with the situation and say, look, here's the answer. You couldn't perform your duties as a father. I mean, that's a very, very harsh thing to say to a father. The absolute don't is don't confront the person, in this case, Troy. When you provide that answer, it may settle things and then tip the person over into committing suicide.
We picked the darkness because it hid people.
There were windows on the second level. Ladders with padding would be placed against the top window to stop the noise effects being heard inside.
If Troy or his wife, Judy, heard people out the back or heard noises, they would have gone out the back with the gun. So Steve was to keep the conversation going as long as he could.
The tactical team told me, now, Steve, we're going to get them out. We've got a plan, but we want you to keep them talking. And I remember saying to him, well, okay, so what, 20 minutes? And he said, easy, 20 minutes. I'm sure we'll be able to work this out.
We were in there yesterday. We asked the welfare, is there any possibility in the near future that we get the baby back? And the welfare said, I'm sorry, but they can't change.
As part of the inquiry, police detectives went to the house of the foster parents and we were getting information back from them. The team put that information down on paper or up on whiteboards so I could read it without interrupting my conversation.
Troy was extremely mentally ill, very mentally ill. He'd attempted suicide. He'd been married 4 times. His first wife was killed in a car accident. His second wife left him after a short time. His third wife he found dead in bed when he woke up one morning.
And essentially everything he had tried to do had led to a failed result.
Where did Judy grow up?
Grew up in orphanages, controlled environment all the way along.
His wife, who was about 20 years older than him, was also mentally ill.
The role of Troy's wife, Judy, in the siege was really to support and obey him.
She followed what Troy said and she was committed to what Troy wanted to do. So she wasn't necessarily a hostage, but in my view and at the time, she was a victim. Those things were coming in all the time, but you can't let your emotions get involved. You can't do what you would normally do as a person. You've got a tendency as an individual, how you act normally, how you would act in front of your family and friends. You can't help but feeling, a sigh or something like that. To stop that or to stifle it and keep going is very difficult. And the skill as a negotiator to take in that information and to be able to not react to it in any way while you're speaking to the person is part of the training.
heightened awareness just goes up. Our biggest concern was the IED. During the extractions, both Troy and Judy were under optics. If we lost sight of those at any point, the extraction would stop.
The team had to go up the back steps. We were minimising the risk as best we could. Troy was being kept out in the reception area. With Steve having Troy on the phone all that time, I was standing near the negotiator without making a sound.
I got to the hour of keeping Troy talking and asking in gestures, like, how long is this going to go on? Because I was running out of things to talk about. They just said, keep talking, keep talking.
The pressure would be quite extreme because the lives of 24 people, plus the police team that had gone to rescue them, that just adds an awful lot of pressure.
It was probably the most excruciating period that I've had to deal with as a negotiator. I resorted to talking to him about food, getting food in there to look after the hostages and himself and Judy. And I remember getting a Chinese menu and going through every single item on the Chinese menu. Now, for some reason, he bought into it. He became involved in the selection of the food, and I even got him talking to how much it was going to cost and how was he going to pay for it, because, you know, it was his responsibility to pay for it.
The onus was placed on him to fund the actual food for the hostages. Not that it wouldn't have been provided anyway, but by doing that, he took responsibility for feeding his hostages. That was a very powerful bonding with the hostages, is that it's very difficult to carry out acts of violence against people you've actually actively fed and for whom you've provided comfort.
And so I was getting information from the psychiatrist all the way through the situation about try this, try that. And he would write notes too, which was very annoying because, you know, have you ever seen a doctor's writing? Trying to decipher that and try and talk to someone who's allegedly got a bomb and has fired a shot from a rifle is a very difficult thing.
He can't read anything. No, I'm responsible for that. I don't have a good handwriting, but I subsequently have learned to print.
Troy ordered chicken chow mein. The hostages ordered spicy KFC. He said, I've only got this much money, and I think I promised that I would pay for the remainder of the money, but he owed it to me and he had to pay for it when he came out.
The key issue for him was to deal with his inadequate personality. So what we wanted to emphasise was that he could be a good person, caring for the hostages.
They went up the back stairs of the building, accessed the premises, and the team, in a number at a time, brought them down.
The biggest nervous moment was when they were leaving. That caused them the most angst because they feared making noises which was going to alert Troy and Judy that there was someone on top of them. What I did see was, out of my peripheral vision while I was scoping Troy and Judy, was the stream of trapped people actually walking down the laneway. You could see those expressions of relief
I remember feeling a lift in the team, and it's good for progress, and we were actually getting somewhere.
When the food delivery was made, it appeared that they were satisfied with that and that they'd done something good. As a sniper, when you're staring at someone for such a long period of time, you become familiar with their attitudes and their changes in demeanour. It's a strange relationship that you build with someone when you're scoping down, looking at them. You develop this bond with them, and then at some point in time in the future, you ask yourself the question, well, I've got to keep this balance, because if they come out of there carrying that IED, then something's going to have to be done with them.
Now, we had to try and rescue the 2 hostages left.
What about letting Megida go?
I can't. Not till I know.
Because, I'm concerned about her.
I know, but if I let them go, we detonate as soon as they get outside the door.
He wanted to speak to his foster mother. As far as normal protocols in negotiation, we don't allow third parties to become involved, because you've got no control of what they're going to say or what they're going to do. I've had situations where families said, let me speak to them, I'll be able to talk them out. They'll listen to me. My reaction is, well, if that was the case, why aren't we discussing this around the family kitchen table? Because obviously something's happened beyond the understanding of the family and friends.
Hello? We've got a slight problem here.
Yeah, what's the problem, Troy?
I just found an extra person.
We became aware that there was another 2 hostages hiding somewhere.
Making a total of 4 hostages still inside.
And he said, I found someone, what should I do? And I said, well, thanks for telling me. Because
I didn't know she was there. I just found her when I was going for the telephone.
Troy's manner, it wasn't as tense, which I think surprised all of us in the negotiation team. It was almost apologetic. It was like, he didn't mean to inconvenience or to hurt anyone, which again is a real positive for us. And then he found the second person, and I said, well, send them out, which he did. He sent them straight out.
We had reached a point where there was trust with the primary negotiator, and that was a major negotiation strategy underpinning the discussions. Every time he behaved well towards hostages and looked after their well-being, the negotiators were very quick to compliment him and encourage him to do more of that.
You start to think that, perhaps both Judith and Troy have got some empathy towards these individuals, and things are not going to get as bad as, everyone may seem. When I see that happening, it sort of takes my finger off the trigger a little bit.
Effective time on negotiations is absolutely crucial. The beginning of an operation, what you have is a situation dominated by high fantasy, high intensity of emotions. What follows that is a much calmer phase of negotiation over time. And in that process, the idea is to build him into a position of relevance in the siege so that he can then take responsibility for ensuring positive outcomes such as the well-being of hostages. And the way we do that is to emphasise his prowess and to not emphasise his inadequacy.
How about doing me a favour right now, Troy?
What?
How about letting one of the girls go?
If one of them wants to go, they can go, but not 2 of them.
No, not 2 of them. I'm not saying 2.
It's their choice. You can speak to them. It doesn't matter to me.
Majida here.
Hello, Majida. Listen, I think at this stage we might be able to get probably let one of you go. How about if you walk out?
Leslie wouldn't feel too comfortable. She's very scared and she finds comfort in me being here.
I understand that to a certain extent, but one of you should come out.
No, she's too frightened.
The two who had been there the longest and who had formed part of that stable quartet in the stronghold were reluctant to be separated. What occurs in the dynamics amongst hostage takers and hostages is that if there is no overt, repetitive threat being played out, there is often a stability in that environment that makes it harder for the hostages to unsettle that stability that has replaced their initial fears. Given that there was still the concern about a bomb, it was very, very important in those circumstances to get at least one of the hostages out.
I would like one of you girls to leave that place.
Yeah?
Now, it's got to be done for the situation in there, okay? And I want you to understand that what I'm saying is, well, it'll help everybody, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just think about what I've said. And if the opportunity arises, I would like one of you to leave.
It's Leslie.
Leslie, okay. Now, I've told you something very, very difficult. And I don't mean to put you in this sort of pressure on you.
You don't know how hard it is.
I know how hard it is.
I bet you've never been in this situation.
She said, you don't know what it's like to be a hostage. And I said, I do, I know what it's like. And I stopped myself, but the words had gone. It's amazing how many people fall for saying, yes, I know what it's like to be a hostage. You're trying to get empathy and you're trying to get rapport, but the real fact is it was hollow and it was stupid, you know. I have been, you know, doing this sort of work for a long time, okay? And I know how difficult this is for you. Leslie, I'm saying one of you must go. It's the right decision, Leslie.
Can we have a little bit more time?
Sure, a couple of minutes at the most.
It was gut-wrenching to listen to because they were behaving as thoroughly decent human beings, each concerned about the other.
Leslie had pushed Majid out.
Well, there was some very tense negotiating by the primary negotiator, and he was successful in getting them to understand the position without explicitly saying that, you know, one of you could both die or only one of you could die. That was never articulated, but it was implicit, and they understood that. And they then saw the seriousness of the situation and came to the decision that they made. It was very brave. Fatigue is quite a silent enemy in that people might become careless. People might sense that the resolution of the operation is likely to happen soon because it suits them because they're tired. And you get these subtle impairments of judgments.
The team leader said to me, Steve, you're over, you know, that you sound tired, you look tired.
Because you can't have people in a highly tense position and not having a break from time to time.
There was a conversation by me saying, I don't think that's right at the moment, you know. I protested. I felt that I had a rapport, that I hadn't finished the job. I was 34 years old. I was ambitious. My wife would always say that the job came first. But in the end, it was about being professional and understanding the process, and the victims there had a right to fresh negotiator. He'd told people that he was going to blow everything up at midnight. So when hostage takers set deadlines, the first thing the negotiators do is make plans about how you're going to talk through the deadline. For example, if you've got an answer to a question and it's an hour from a deadline, you might hold that answer for an hour and wait till 5 minutes before the deadline and say, here, I've got the answer to your question and let's talk about this. One of the discussions around the deadline of midnight was whether I would carry through that 12 midnight deadline or whether we'd change negotiators. So we decided to use the change of negotiator to be that way of talking through the deadline. There's several ways to hand over to another negotiator. One is two people can talk on the one phone call and say, look, I'll just introduce you to Jane. But there's always the danger that while it's on that call, Troy will say, no, I don't want to speak to Jane, tell her to go away, and you're stuck. But if you do a cold handover and Jane says, look, Steve's left the truck, he's gone to do something and I can't just get hold of him at the moment, there's no choice. So Jane did a cold handover. In other words, she just rang straight after I'd spoken to him. And in this case, that handover went extremely well. And Jane took over and took over the negotiation to get Leslie out. So I stayed in the truck. I performed the duties of a secondary negotiator. I listened and provided notes. I believe Jane developed a very good rapport with Troy, and she was able to compliment him on a number of things about Troy's strengths, and Jane would always try and get him to make a promise that he would ring back to keep the conversation going. And Leslie came out at 11:50.
Once it was done, what you had was you'd reduce the stress and the pressure level on all of the police and anyone else involved.
Well, I think for me, getting all those people out through a negotiation, you have so many downs, and I'd made some errors that I was highly critical of myself, and that was a great success for me and gave myself a very personal lift. Later on, he set another deadline. Troy said if he didn't get his answers about his son by sunrise, he would kill himself and kill Judy.
Once the hostages were all released safely, the negotiators did what they're trained to do, and that is to switch over into a suicide prevention operation.
And we didn't stop trying to get Troy and Judy out of there. Getting Judy out was really important to me because I felt that she was a simple woman that was coerced into this situation, that she wasn't really a party to it, but she was going along with it, but didn't really understand the ramifications. Jane had a conversation with Judith, and I felt that Jane had a good rapport with Judith. But whenever we thought that we're getting somewhere, she would just say, I'll do whatever Troy wants.
For Troy, there was this sense of relief when they'd actually released those 4 people, and they appeared to relax a lot more. you start to think that the negotiators are actually getting progress, they're getting traction, they've got a bond with them. Generally what follows from that is a successful, peaceful resolution is generally what flows, but sometimes that doesn't always happen.
When I finally left the negotiators' truck, I believed that we would resolve it peacefully. The second team that came in and took over kept on ringing and was getting no answer at all.
About 7 a.m. that morning, entry was made to the premises. They were found dead in the room. Troy had shot his wife a number of times and that he then shot himself.
And a bomb team goes in, and at the end of the day, it was found that they had no IEDs whatsoever.
I was told about the tactical team found the bodies of Troy and Judy early that morning. I felt devastated.
I think it's a story of a man with significant inadequacies who was failing virtually in all aspects of his life. And I think in the end he saw that he had very few options, and unfortunately he took his very dependent wife with him.
What was in the back of my mind was we hadn't heard any shots, but when you consider the weapon that was being used, you consider the environment that they were in when they actually fired the shots, you wouldn't have heard them anyway. The problems that are going on in their head must be so insurmountable. And you walk away thinking, in my case, could we have done better? Well, I don't know the answer to that.
I felt sorry for his whole life and his lifestyle, the way he was brought up from scratch. And while there's a sense of sorrow in that, there's also a sense of understanding, and there is also a substantial sense of relief that there's been no innocent people killed or injured.
I felt that I'd failed. I've had a number of negotiations where people had died over the years, and all those negotiations are the one I remembered. I don't remember the hundreds of negotiations where they were totally successful. So these are the things that imprinted in your brain, unfortunately. It's the most challenging area that you can be involved in is saving people's lives, and it's not using lethal weapon. In fact, it's the reverse. It's using only words.